I'm Steve Scholey, I'm the manager of P&G Wells, or should I say the custodian. I feel like I'm just the last in a long line of people to look after this historic bookshop. It's been here for, we think, nearly 300 years, so possibly one of the oldest bookshops on the same site in the country, and certainly one of the oldest retailers in Winchester. The Wells name has been associated with the shop since about 1830, when Joseph Wells started here as an apprentice for the owner at the time. I think when that owner died, he took on the business. 1862, I think it was. He was the first of 3 generations of the Wells family that have looked after the shop, and the last was in 1983. The shop was bought up by a group of ex-Winchester College boys, and most of them, all their sons, are still shareholders. But it wasn't just a bookshop even then. It was a stationer's, it was a printer's, it was a publisher's, and it had a bindery. And so the bindery that we still have behind us is a really important part of our heritage. I think originally it was upstairs, but because of the weight of the printing presses, it's now moved downstairs.
I started off and I opened up a bindery up in the woods in the wilds of Hampshire, and I ran that for a couple of years. I was looking around for work to get, and I visited Wells and realised there was a bindery here that wasn't used because it had shut down. And I asked them if I could rent it off them, and 40 years later here I am. In the 18th century, books were sold by bookshops, but they were sold in a relatively unbound form. So what you could do then was you could keep them like that in a very simple, very primitive binding, or you could take them to a bookbinder and you could have them bound up into a smarter binding, leather binding, whatever. And now the bindery, it's still attached to the bookshop, but it's a separate business. But it's a working space, so from where you are at the door, that's about as far as people tend to come in. So obviously they see it as a curious old-fashioned workshop.
Our connection with Winchester College goes back to at least 1729. So the first record that we have of the shop is an invoice for a book that was sold to the college nearly 300 years ago. Winchester College is our oldest customer, and they're still an important customer now, but by no means the only one. So we sell books to the college, we sell books to lots of other schools in the area, even overseas. One of our biggest customers is actually in Montenegro. I think a lot of people think we're just the college bookshop, but absolutely not. We're totally independent.
Mostly, I'm repairing books that people have a particular attachment to, their mother's Bible or cookbook or a book their father loved. Jane Austen, people always like Jane Austen in Winchester, at least they do anyway. I do have a relationship with the college, and I have done some work for them in the past, and I have worked on books in the college's historical library, the Fellows Library. They have a copy of the first translation, the St James Bible, and I've done some work on that. I used to teach some of the college boys a class here. They had a bookbinding society.
The front of the bookshop is just classic. It features on so many postcards and pictures. We've got the stained glass panel above the door, which dates back to 1890s. The windows themselves are Victorian Gothic, put in 1891. There's a frieze around the top of the wall in the front part of the shop, which is again an original feature, so one that we try to look after. The stairs were put in 1911 when the bookshop was expanded from the ground floor to go up onto the middle floor of the building as well. Lovely Art Deco feature. We know that the Hampshire Chronicle was originally published here and printed here.
The oldest books I've worked on, I suppose, are in the sort of 15th century, very early books are called incunabula. A bit later on, when books were rather more common, I've had a lot of books of the sort of 16th and 17th, 18th and 19th century.
There's ourselves and one other bookshop remaining on the street, but I'm told that back in the heyday of bookselling in Georgian times, there are as many as 30 bookshops along College Street. We also, in normal times, would offer various workshops. So we've had writing workshops, poetry, other sort of art-related workshops, and we'll be looking to launch those again. We like to do things which are a little bit unusual. If it's selling well on the high street, in the supermarkets, you might not find it here, but you will find some more unusual books.
Well, the oldest actual physical tool is probably that little press there, that little imperial press. Those shears hung up there, and they date from about 1690, 1700, that sort of time. Lettering on books in this country didn't really start until 1640. So the lettering tools, which are the tools in the boxes and the decorative tools up there, they all date from there forward. That's a little scallop shell, and that dates from about 1770, 1780. And I still use this tool, even though it's so old. So that's the little tool, that's the centre tool there. I used it because it kind of suits Jane Austen, not because it was so old. I've bound a lot of these up for customers, but this one I did for myself. And I have a suspicion that my daughter's rather fond of it, and she will end up with it. The biggest piece of machinery I have is right behind me, and it's this which is an actual guillotine. It actually cuts the edges of the whole book in one go. There are hand tools dotted around everywhere, as you can see under the bench, and bone folders, which are the tools you actually work with on a day-to-day basis. And lots of the designs on the backs of books are made up of lots and lots of, in the 18th century particularly, made up of lots and lots of small tools, all put together into a pattern. And these are some of the small tools. These are some of my favourite ones.
One of the things that we really love doing here at Wells is having events, and it's been a little bit of a challenge in the last year or so, but we've been doing online events. So one of those that we did is for Claire Fuller. This is her latest novel, Unsettled Ground, so we did the launch event for this. This is by a local poet, and it is illustrated by one of, I think, Hampshire's best artists. And it's about experiences of looking after somebody's house while they were away, and all the incidents that happen. You know, the things that go wrong with houses, especially old thatched cottages. When house sitting for Mary, there's things you should beware. Not big things, just small things that catch you unawares. Like the spider in your dressing gown, the startled moth within a drawer, or the armour-plated battalion that patrol the bathroom floor. I've really enjoyed this one, and I hope that more of our customers will.
In the last few years, Louisa, who used to work at the hospital, has sort of retired from that, and she now comes down and helps me here. You have to know a little bit about the history of book decoration, so that when you're repairing something or rebinding something, quite often you have to bind it in the period that it was published in effect. The whole trade is very much in decline, which is a shame. But on the other hand, there's quite a lot of binding done by private people as a kind of hobby, as a craft.
We have lots of regular customers. I had a gentleman in here a few weeks ago who has been using the shop for over 50 years and has had an account here for that length of time. We know that Jane Austen's family had an account here back in the early 1800s. So we don't know whether Jane herself actually came in here, but certainly her family would have been in here. And shortly after that, we know that John Keats would have walked along this road on his way to the Water Meadows to write his Ode to Autumn. So he may well have come in here and trodden on our lovely oak boards that we have here that we're told date back to the 1790s when the shop was first built.
The good thing about the fact that the book trade has kind of slumped somewhat is that it makes books much more affordable to relatively ordinary people. There's not a very good, in fact there's hardly is a good setup for learning to do it. I run classes sometimes, but there aren't very many people running them for actual trade binders, which I was. I'm in the process of sort of winding down to retiring now, so probably by the middle of the next year I'll pretty much be retired, and I'll take a few tools home and maybe do a little bit of binding at home, but it won't be like this anymore.
There's lots of features I know about that we've lost, like the big high desk that Miss Wells used to sit behind and watch out over the shop. And I'm told that the counter was at the front of the shop, just in here. And they had a pulley system, so the counter clerks would take the money from the customer and put it into a little basket, and it'd get lifted up and carried along the pulley to Miss Wells at the back, and she would take the money, and then if there was any change to be given, that would go back in the basket and get pulled along to the front of the shop, and then the customer would be given their change.
My father was a great fan of Rudyard Kipling, and this is Soldiers 3, and I bound it up for him. It was a pretty grotty copy, you might say, and he just loved it so much that I put this binding on just for him. But the difficulty with the decoration, apart from the fact that it's difficult, it is genuinely quite difficult to do, is the fact that it's very unforgiving. If you make a mistake, a really serious mistake, it's done. I bound this up when I was an apprentice. I've written in the front. It's an early edition, bound at Warren & Sons, Winchester, in 1976, when I was still doing my apprenticeship. Bit dusty.
We've seen over the last year or so a lot of changes in retail, and one of those has been a lot of people in the first lockdown buying online. And there's almost been a bit of a backlash from that, we think, and people are now realising the value of little local shops like ourselves, like our neighbours in Kingsgate Village, and all the other independent shops around Winchester, of which sadly there are fewer and fewer each year. They seem to be gradually disappearing. But I hope that people just recognise the value of having all those independent shops, being able to come in and browse and find the things that they want. But we realise that we have to be online ourselves. It's a part of 21st century retail. So we've built our own website over the last year or so.
People think because it's got a cathedral that it's a great big place with a cathedral in the middle. It's a great small place with a cathedral in the middle.
We are independent. We're not part of a larger group. You know, it's pretty much down to me to keep this business going. We would very much like to be here for our 300th anniversary when that comes up in 8 years or so, and we would like to celebrate it and feel that we're able to celebrate it by being a strong business and having a bright future. And as the current custodian of Wells, I feel my job is to get us there.